Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. I got Bam, Tony, myself here, and today we're going to be going over another question talking about what kind of moves or like maybe patterns and stuff like that you need to respect in the game. Of course, if you guys do enjoy the content and you want to support us, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you feel about the topic. And of course, if you want to support us even more, you can go ahead and subscribe to our Discord where you can go ahead and ask us these questions and we'll go ahead and make an episode out of it. So, with that being said, Tony, will you do the honors?
Remna asks, one thing that has been on my mind lately is the concept of respect in fighting game. As a Pikachu main, this concept is very necessary to understand in order to play them at any high level. Many Pikas will have the mindset of, my character's broken so I can do what I want, and are very surprised when they get blown up by Ganon. What I've noticed, though, is most people seem to only think about on a surface level. Like, oh, Samus has charge shot, so I must respect it, or Incineroar just revenged my forward smash, I need to give him space. But lately, I've been trying to expand this concept for myself to include things like respecting burst ranges, feinting respect of a move for conditioning, and determining whether someone is giving respect out of knowledge or fear. So my question would be, in what ways does the concept respect affect any given match on a game-to-game level, rather than interaction to interaction?
Repeat the very last part.
In what ways does the concept respect affect any given match to game level rather than interaction to interaction?
So, like on a matchup level?
I believe he is asking, or they are asking, what the adaptation within respect is, but based on the context of it, I think they're asking what the nature of respect is and how you should recognize the differences.
I think for me, whenever I'm playing or I'm watching players play, especially at a top level, one of the first things I try to see, and I mean this is going to be one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is the neutral, right? And how they respect your tools and how you respect their tools. That's going to happen immediately right at go, right? And I think when you're playing a high mobility neutral character, someone like Pikachu or Sheik or, you know, Diddy Kong, things like that, where your neutral is really strong, right? But you might not get an electric and just blow them up. So the game dynamic for you, like you knowing what to respect, because you don't have the crazy big threat unless you're playing a matchup where it's like, oh, if I get a back air as Pikachu, I put this character off stage in there, and then I'm in such a advantageous position, and they only have a handful of options, but they have to respect my edge guard really hard, and because of that, they have to respect me in neutral a lot because I get a really favorable situation. So this is hard because you have to have a lot of knowledge of the game to know what you should and should not be respecting. On a technical level, we can bring it down to a general level of just, I think the most general part of understanding respect is knowing how often someone will just commit and go for the hard read or call you out, right? And I think this happens more so at lower levels of play because the defense is not as refined, right? When you look at top level play, the defense on these players and just how clean they play neutral and how little they commit, or when they do commit, the dice is loaded very much so in their favor. That's the fascinating part of top level play because they're so disciplined, because their defense is so tight, because it's so hard to get your opening on these players, right? And especially top level players, when they do get their opening, they usually make it count a lot. So they usually get a really, really good scenario out of it. They know how to set these things up. But I think just kind of getting the feel for how risky your opponent wants to play the game, that is very, very important at lower levels of play. And I think that's going to be the first layer of the quote unquote respect that you're trying to really download, right? It's like, okay, well, if this person just wants to swing super wild, I have this high mobility character and I can just whiff punish over and over again. I think that's the first layer, right? And then when you start playing against players that are more experienced and they have better defense, or they take in neutral, they make just generally better risk reward. That's when you start getting into the deeper layers of respect, where it's like, okay, now I'm respecting very specific moves, right? So, and then you have to figure out when your opponent likes to go for that KO move. Because realistically, in Smash, you really want to preserve your stock. And this is where high mobility characters like Pikachu are really strong, because your survivability should be very good, because you have a lot of ways out of disadvantage, especially things like quick attack. The reversal's not as crazy as Steve, right? I think Steve is the upper echelon of being able to respect Steve and disadvantage. Like, oh, I won neutral, right? And this also applies to Smash 4 Bayo. I won neutral, I should be hitting you. Oh, snap, wait a minute, you're the best character in the game. So, like, you can kill me after I beat you in neutral in multiple ways. So, I think that's probably the biggest thing. And I think when you're trying to get better at respecting your opponent, playing in a way of not getting reversal is probably the simplest thing to do, where you have faith in your advantage state and you're like, okay, I don't necessarily have to get the KO now, but I'm going to respect all of your reversal options and then go from there. And you'll become a lot cleaner of a player if you put yourself in scenarios where you don't get reversaled. Obviously, there are going to be times where you lose the game because of that, because you're not pulling the trigger when you should, and they get to 180 and then they hit you with one wild read and then you lose the game, right? It's just the nature. You got to balance it. But when scouting out for respect specifically, those are the first things I think of. And then also keying in what your opponent is not respecting, right? Finding those tools that it's like, oh, wow, you're really just not shielding when I'm running up to you and I'm Fox. Like, okay, cool. Like, you keep dashing back, you keep jumping. I'm just going to keep spamming dash attack until you get to the point where you realize, like, oh, wow, I can't move as much around Fox if he's in dash attack range. I have to be more grounded. I have to walk more. I have to shield more, right? Like, simple things like that. I think another thing about respect as well is I feel like some players don't realize that walking is such a great option if you're trying to respect something, because at any given point, like, even if Samus has charge shot, if you start walking towards Samus, you're changing the situation very slightly depending on how strong your character's walk is, but you are closing the gap, and at any given point you can react with shield, right? Obviously there's counterplay, but you playing grounded, walking, I would say most of the time is one of the best ways to respect the scenario that you might not be too familiar with, or just any move that's strong, because at any given point of your walk you can shield. And it's a frame one option, so it's just, it'll come out as long as you react quick enough. But you also got to realize the closer you get to the opponent, the less time you have to react to said charge shot, right? So you also understanding the range in which it becomes a guessing game. And I think a lot of players, that's where they get a little confused, where the lack of information kind of gets a little lost in transaction, because you are like, oh, well, I was walking, but you were point blank against Samus. So at that point, you're playing more of a guessing game. And knowing when you're playing that guessing game and knowing when you can react is such a big deal. And even understanding, like, oh, hey, I'm nervous. I usually react well in this scenario and I block it. But, oh, I guess I'm playing nervous, so I need to crank that range back a little bit. And that push and pull and understanding how well you're playing in certain mental states, and also understanding your opponent's mental states, right? I think players like Tweak are really good at this, or even Leo, specifically pre-quarantine or a little after quarantine. Leo was so good at picking up when someone's like tilted, or when someone is trying to play a certain way that they should be technically playing, but they just aren't executing, and they'll just blow you up for it. And so understanding that part, you have to be really experienced, and you have to have a lot of hours into the game, and you have to know specific interactions. Like, I think a lot of players at lower level, they don't even understand, and it's not their fault or anything, but they're not even understanding what the opponent is reacting to. So, for example, if I'm getting ledge trapped by, Larry Avoid, this is probably people I've played with that a lot that are very, very good at the game. I understand that they're reacting, like they can react to jump. So sometimes I have to like ledge jump, double jump immediately to get out to a top platform or something, and that makes it a little harder for them. But if I'm playing someone that's not Larry Avoid and they're not reacting to ledge jump, then I can ledge jump, nair, fast fall down, and maybe get a reversal, right? But that shit is not going to work against more experienced players where I have to burn more resources to just get out. So even that kind of thing. And then sometimes when you play with really good players and then you play with someone that may not place as well as you do, but they beat you in friendlies or in tournament, and you're trying to apply those same tactics that you're using when you're playing against higher top level players, and you're just like, well, wait, what? Why is this not working? Because you're now they react to the double jump, but they're not even able to react to your ledge jump. So you're kind of throwing away options that could be very good versus this player specifically because where they're at in terms of reacting and their ledge trapping skills. But you're not even using those options because you're over respecting because you feel it. You might not even have the conscious thought, but you've been ledge trapped so hard from other players that you feel like everyone's ledge trapping is that good. And sometimes you just got a normal get up and be like, do you got it? Can you even grab my normal get up on reaction out of shield? Right? Like sometimes you got to throw that out there and just see if they can do it or not. Right? So little things like that are, I guess, my perspective and I guess just like a wrapped up experience of my perspective of respect. And I've played against a lot of different levels of players. I mean, so it's very hard to juggle that. And that is where adaptation comes in, right? That's where you're supposed to be able to acclimate as quick as possible. And that's why these top players are so good. Not only do they have the execution, but they have the adaptation not only in the game and matchup wise, but also knowing where their opponent is in a mental state, especially in tournament. That's super important. What are your thoughts, Bam?
Yeah, I mean, per usual, like I agree with what you said. I think that, yeah, when it comes down to general, when you're looking at play, like, and you're going beyond interactions, I mean, that being said, obviously, interactions are going to be the things that are going to help you find the pattern of play that can give you a general idea of how someone is respecting you as a player, right? So it's not independent of that. It's just, like, I guess we're like zooming out in this regard. Yeah, like patterns in like terms of respect are really important. A lot of times you want to make sure you are looking at some of these these points of contention within a matchup or within like, a set that you're playing with someone, right? You brought up a good example about the Samus charge shot, right? Understanding that space, something that I was even literally talking about yesterday at Ichigo Con, right, with Icy Mist playing, is that, like, yeah, of course, obviously charge shot is good, and one of my co-casters was talking about like, oh yeah, but Game & Watch is a reflector. It's like, okay, yeah, that's going to be there, but when you get to a certain level, it's not solely about charge shot. It's about the threat of charge shot and what happens there. And like, is this something that you have to do a preemptive option to deal with this move? If so, now I get you moving just from standing there, just by being in this place, just being in range, right? And that's going to be that kind of respect. And it's important to be able to figure that out. I think everyone, like, and I mean, just naturally just playing the game too, like, you're going to have certain key things. The game that should determine what level of respect that you probably are looking at for this person, or in general. I think especially if you're learning the game and you're looking at the lower to mid level, right? You're gonna realize like, oh, this person does not want to be here at all. It's usually pretty clear, right? When you get to like those kind of levels where it's like, oh man, this person clearly doesn't want to be in this space because they're afraid of getting hit by this move, right? So they're already jumping. They double jump. Like, some people playing Icy Mist, they were just double jumping into the sky because they were just like, oh, I don't want to be on this ground because that means I might get hit by a charge shot. And so he walks up and they're already just burning all their resources, right? And you want to be able to scout that out, right? At any point in time when you are running your game plan, you want to be able to see those things that are important, right? Because everyone is going to have, like, there's going to be general things. And as you continue to get better and improve in a game, a lot of those are going to bear some similarities to others, but everyone's going to have these particular things that they really are cognizant of, or they're really trying to, like, they're threats that they really are worried about, right? And you want to be able to determine those things and want to see how people tend to interact, because that gives you a sneak peek into their general game plan and like what like if you understand what ticks, right? That's how you can manipulate the situation into your favor, right? That's how you can start to hedge certain bets on particular things and stack things in your favor because oh, I know you are afraid of being in this space right here. So do I need to focus my time on like covering this spot? If your game plan is to not be in that spot all the time, no, I'm going to look for your escape option. I'm going to spend more time on that escape option. I'm probably still going to show you that, like, and make sure that threat is still in your head, right? By doing something in that space and showing you, yeah, I'm willing to cover the space. But the real thing that you're probably going to start looking for is, okay, what is that escape option? Because you clearly do not want to be here, right? A very easy classic one that I'm sure we are all aware of is like, we talk about the noob killer, right? Someone getting thrown off stage, and the moment they get pretty much like parallel with the stage, they go for the double jump, right? That's like a very like classic, super basic thing, right? When you see someone who's just learning Smash, and they all do it because they're like, dude, I don't want to be low because if I'm low, then I'm probably gonna die and it's gonna be hard for me to recover. Oh crap, I need to get on stage now. I don't like being here. I'm uncomfortable. I'm gonna jump, right? And so when you see those things, right? Like you start like they're already respecting the fact that like they don't respect themselves to the point that they don't think they can make it, and also they think that they're going to be below you. You're probably just going to kill them, right? And so when you got to abuse that, right? So now it's like, oh, I'm just going to hit that escape option. Like, again, this is a very, very, very basic thing that pretty much I'm sure every Smasher has done at one point in time to their friends who don't really play Smash like that, but they think they do. And they just get hit and they get double jump and they fly into some tilt or some Smash. And then they just have no resources and they just die for free. And they just die at like 30% or something ridiculous because of that situation, right? But those things are very important to dictate. And as you get to a higher level, you're starting to start looking for these kind of like gauging someone's respect situation, not just in neutral, right? But also how they deal with juggling, right? Are they someone that they're extremely afraid of getting hit by anything in a juggle situation? That they're willing to burn their double jump? This is very important, right? A lot of people like to do double jump defense, right? It's something that's been a classic since this game's competitive inception, right? But of course, if you were just double jumping unwarranted and someone's chilling, now you have lost one of your most precious resources in the air and you're in a really bad situation. And so recognizing that someone is doing that is going to be a benefit to you, because instead of you swinging and they double jump somewhere and try to land on a platform, you can go for a feint, or maybe you can swing out a quick option that allows you to recover in enough time to still be able to pressure them now airborne still and without a double jump. And then now you can do some big things, right? And these are really key into scouting out gaps in players and punish them hard, right? You really, that's where you want to go from your general game plan to start looking into tailoring your game plan towards players, right? Because everyone's gonna have a general game plan with their character or like versus someone else's character. But something we talk about a lot is as you start to move forward, it's also like, how are you looking at character specialist habits, right? Are you looking at player habits here? What do they like to do in this kind of situation? You want to be putting people in these situations that make them uncomfortable, right? And if they are going to start respecting certain options from you, then it is like, all right, cool. This is where I can start pressuring them, right? This is where I get an added advantage because there's something that they're so worried about. They're naturally limiting their own options. And that's a big thing about respect. That's also the reason on the reverse side of the coin, a lot of times you tell them, and like what you were saying, Charles, I'm a regular get up in your face. I used to do this to Scizor all the time. When it was like year 2, 3 in Ultimate, I used to do this to Scizor all the time. He'd get so mad. He's like, "Why are you doing that? You know that can be punished." I'm like, "But you're not punishing it. Why would I? Why would I care? I'm regularly getting up. Like, you need to show me that you can do it. And you do it once, good job. Get a gold star. I'm gonna do it again until you do something that makes it like, damn, I lost the game because I did that. I'm just gonna let it rock, dude. like Charles knows, I love to play like that all the time. I'm gonna do short hop, auto cancel, dare with Pyra, and just freaking flare it out. And who cares? Because
Mhm.
you need to show someone that you can actively punish those things, right? You gotta like at the same time, you need to understand how your opponent's respecting you. You also need to understand for your own self, right? Like where you should draw the line between okay, they actually can deal with something here, and I need to respect that. But they need to show you, right? You shouldn't just be respecting someone in certain spaces automatically without them showing you that they have the capacity and the competency to reliably and effectively punish you and effectively do something that will change the entire course of the game. Like because they were able to punish this so consistently, I lost the game. Right? Then you need to have discussions. And obviously that's going to be harder to do as you're just playing someone for the first time. You get it, you are able to get that knowledge more so over time. But that's extremely important when you're tailoring your game plan and just kind of going to the next level to like just defeat opponents, right? And like just get these like clutch comebacks and all these kind of things, right? Like you really need to understand what your opponent's mentality is at all time, right? So going from it's just about this move being good, you definitely need to start looking at the threat of a move, what it causes people to do, what counter options do they try to tend to like employ because of the strength of this move. And once you start looking at those things, the game opens up for you, right? That's why you can see certain things from players. You're like, oh, this player does this, and someone hits me out of this all the time, or this blah blah blah. People say that all the time, all right? And it's because you're probably missing some of these other things, or just the fact that this player is being respected because they've been seen and they've been known to be able to reliably punish this, right? And so people have to be like, okay, now they're good here. They're strong here. I have to do some other counter option. So because of that, they get to use some other moves and other strategies that probably you haven't been able to utilize, quite simply because you haven't shown that you're strong enough in that area for someone to employ a counter strategy in the first place, right? So it's really important to start looking at those things. And honestly, that's some of the most enjoyable aspects, right? Of like competitive gaming, when you start to get into that point, when you start to see that like kind of nuance and like, okay, how do I navigate and how do I kind of like just like maneuver and like hedge my bets on certain things depending on what you're afraid of and what I'm afraid of and what I'm not like what I'm willing to do and what you're not willing to do, and vice versa, right? So those things go a very long way when you're trying to step into the next stage of your development in competitive like fight games, and definitely for Smash Ultimate. So yeah, I think respect is a big thing. It's good that talking to the posting the question, like it's good that you are looking at things now, not just from those interactions, but looking at it from a more broader spectrum, because it's very, very important as you're going through games and kind of seeing the ebb and flow and where people are at, where they're able to reliably punish things, where they're able to not, because there's always going to be fluctuations of humanity. That's just how we are as people, right? You're gonna have the good days, you're gonna have the bad days. People are gonna have certain things they fear a little bit more than others. There's gonna be certain people that don't care, and you need to hit them 80 times until they actually change it up, right? And being able to identify what player you're going up against and what key situations they do that in is extremely important in your overall growth. And then the last thing I would probably say just about that is that finding like those key things. I mean, general things I talked about a little bit earlier, but ledge trapping, right? Those are going to be big moments. Like you need to identify kind of what people tend to lean into, what they're afraid of, what they really options they respect from their opponent, etc. Like that's going to be really vital for you. That's also going to be real vital for you in with juggling, right? And also when you're getting juggled, right? What do they try to lean in for? What are they trying to what's their core goal? What options from you are they worried about, right? If someone is worried about for example, your Bayo, and they're so worried about you doing witch time, like they're afraid of witch time. They don't want to get hit by that. They're going to go for grabs and do this kind of stuff. You can use that information against them, right? And also just the idea of like, they're like afraid of being hit by counters and stuff like that, so they're playing passive. So now I can take that not just from that interaction of witch time, but now I can kind of zoom out and like, okay, now is this something that the person's doing in a general sense? Like they just generally like to play really passive here. And they want to be sure and they don't want to be aggressor. Okay, if they're giving me this respect and they're giving me this space, now what can I do with it, right? To put the game better into my favor, right? And get a W. So yeah, a lot of things to think about there, but again, it's the fun. Honestly, to me, it's one of the most exciting things when it comes to gaming. So yeah, Tony, what do you think about just general like respect in terms of, yeah, not just the like interactions, but overall when you're looking at that, you're competing against opponent.
So while I'm personally not educated enough to be able to tell you what that would be, I do believe there actually is probably an equation to determining how much respect to give someone based on the probability of certain spaces being interacted with by the opponent's given heat map on their frame data and such. So that along with risk reward are factors you can look at generally. So as Charles mentioned, because we don't have a formula, generally what we have is a very intelligent subconscious feel for it with experience. A very large amount of experience that comes up with it. And so I think that the short answer is that. To elaborate a bit more, though, I think that it's a matter of you needing to ask yourself, well, what's the worst that could happen? And then from that, think of, well, what is the likelihood of the worst happening? And can I change that based on where I position myself, as Bam was saying? So, since you mentioned Pikachu with Ganondorf as an example, yes, Ganondorf can hit with very hard things, but the difference with what Ganondorf gets as a setup off of, let's say, a dash attack versus a run up and nair versus getting a down air are all very different risk rewards. In particular, if you are setting yourself up so that you are in range for Ganondorf jumping forward and down airing, then that isn't necessarily a space that as Pikachu you have to occupy in order to interact with Ganondorf and get many of your highest reward starters. So if you can get your biggest rewards without interacting with some of Ganondorf's biggest rewards, why are you here? Just don't position yourself there, is the short answer. And so it's not a matter of respecting that, it's a matter of, well, couldn't I have just gotten the same things I was getting before, but without giving him the same opportunities? And in that case, that is where understanding it. Now, I think the more straightforward example is Samus's charge shot, actually, since that I treat it personally as its own mini game, essentially, is you reach a point where Samus's charge shot innately does not cover jumps because it's more of a high-low mix-up where Samus has to choose, do I air to air here? Do I shoot charge shot to cover ground? Or do I jump with charge shot to air, etc., etc.? And you have to decide, well, if I pressure Samus now, then she has to make this decision. But if I wait so many frames later, charge shot is going to reach a charge level, at which point it covers a short hop still. And now I have to determine whether or not I'm going to high-low in with my full hop versus short hop. And the difference there is that, I don't think it was mentioned before, but there is enough input delay that things like short hops that would normally be humanly reactable are not humanly reactable in practice because of that input delay. And for defensive options in particular, this effectively means that when you are playing Ultimate, when you are playing aggressively, you have the frame data of Smash Ultimate. When you're playing defensively, you have the frame data of Soul Calibur, which by that I mean just referencing the frame 1 shield that Charles mentioned as an example. Yes, that it's frame 1, but is your shield frame 1? And the answer is probably not. Your shield is effectively a frame 7 button that is coming off of your reaction time relative to the opponent's animation. So you're using a frame 7 option to respond to something that the opponent is doing. So is what they're doing reactable within that context? And for most top players, if you are doing something that is even within the teens, it's something very challenging to react to with a frame 7 option. And so I think that something people tend to misunderstand is relating to this frame data within the context of how they understand frame data in other fighting games versus with Ultimate's frame delay in particular. So, with this in mind then, because it is more difficult to react on defense than offense, this means, and this of course is exacerbated by hit lag, which I believe we've discussed on this podcast before, but essentially the windows that you are given are penalized in practice on response and buffed to respond to if you are hit confirming things. And so what you are offered is that things that require you to respond with non-hit confirms are typically less likely to, or rather more likely to reach the riskier ends of that risk reward. Because if you do move into Ganondorf with something like, say, a dash grab, or if you run up in hard space and aerial, overshoot into him, etc., but he goes for a high-low mix-up instead of moving away from you, then all of a sudden he's now going to be able to position in a way so that he gets his high rewarding things, and so that you still can't react to the startup of those high rewarding things because of the penalty. You can't afford to just dash in and then react, is he still shielding? That's not usually something you have enough time to do before Ganondorf can make the same decision, except what you're reacting with is, well, generally going to be like a frame 10 dash grab, while he's reacting with a frame 3 spot dodge to the same penalty, if you do try and create that scenario. And so you have actually, in an attempt to aggress him, you have actually created the same penalty that defense has for yourself as an offense. And so in practice, what this translates to is when people go for dash grab, dash attack mix-ups, they are typically making the decision in advance and coupling it with their inputs so that the opponent doesn't have enough time to mitigate their defensive penalties. And so the game fundamentally rewards you for preemptively making these decisions on offense, and fundamentally obviously punishes you for trying to be up in the moment and disrespect your opponent in a way that puts you in a mobile defense, or puts wheels on the fort, is fundamentally not effective in Ultimate like it was in Smash 4 or Brawl, where one of the predominant playstyles is things like dash shielding in and trying to bait your opponent into interacting with your fortress. In Ultimate, it's about positioning your fortress in ways that look assailable but are not. And so you want to essentially move your castle so that it looks like you're ready to batter the gate, but actually push it back a little bit further so that your opponent's operating on bad intel and they're whiffing at nothing. And I believe, again, we've discussed this before in a previous episode on mashing and its place in the game. And so what you want to look at essentially is start in neutral and ask yourself, what is it that's so important for me to be connecting that I need to interact with what my opponent wants to connect? And if possible, win the game without giving your opponent the opportunity to do the same thing. If it's not possible, which again, it is as Pikachu, but not for the entire cast. So let's say you're playing a relatively stubby character like Jigglypuff or some such, you can still zone in to get certain hits that are very high rewarding that you want, while not positioning yourself to be starting Ganondorf's optimal starters. And so at that point, what you're going to want to do is you're going to look at what angles you can approach, what angles you can zone in, what timings you can do that threaten what you really want, so that your opponent is forced to play with that defensive penalty if possible. And so you can create the dynamic of putting them on the reactive end. And so, and how this typically translates into neutral is that you have essentially an RPS of you're reacting, you're playing positionally reactive. So, in other words, my opponent can dash attack at me, or I'm trying to react to my opponent's dash attack. If you are reacting to the opponent's dash attack, you typically require more space in order to give you more time. If you're reacting to your opponent's position to dash attack you, then you are essentially acting on preceding information to make your decision, and then make that assumption based on the preceding information. So this is actually something that commonly comes up. I think the most noticeable feature I've seen here is if you watch top-level players play against Sonic players, then you will typically see them back up and play around Sonic's dash attack. And so the Sonic dash attack is actually such a big, fast tool that the space that reactive players give it, so let's say, for example, if you watch MKLeo play versus Sonic, he's the first person that comes to mind, you'll see him actually back up probably at least half of a stage to give himself so much space because he doesn't want to react to the position to dash attack. He wants to react to the dash attack itself. And so his sacrifice to achieve this end is that he actually creates extra space. Whereas if you were to play a more aggressive form, so this is where you get, like, say, Light playing versus Sonic, where he also has a fast dash attack, but he wants to kind of jockey for that position because Sonic's dash attack is bigger and not necessarily faster, but within the relative threat of it as a burst tool, typically is going to be more aggressive than Fox's. However, once you add into the risk reward of Fox connecting a dash attack versus Sonic connecting a dash attack, you now have the emphasis that there's a very small space ranges where if Fox can make it out of that space, so either be far enough back that he can react to Sonic's dash attack, or close enough that Sonic can't react to Fox's dash attack, that dynamic shifts. And so typically if you see Sonic's the player play versus Light the player, typically what you'll see is in their neutral spaces, you will see them kind of jockeying around so that Fox can be positioned outside of that space or inside of that space, but not between, while you'll see Sonic trying to position Fox's character into being in that little sweet spot where he's not close enough to unreactably dash attack, but he's also not so far away that he can react to Sonic's dash attack. And that fundamentally achieves a position where now either you are playing as Sonic and you are willing to dash attack and just make your opponent feel the threat of it, and they now are pressured based on the implication of your dash attack. Similar to what we were talking about with Samus's charge shot, except the risk reward of it is that, well, what if Fox just takes a couple steps forward and then shields? Because that is so non-committal, typically what you'll see is movements and actions that are much less committal to muddle the situation, make it unclear on when each player is supposed to make these decisions. And it can get very confusing very fast as the situation becomes much more complicated, as you just essentially each player tries to confuse the other player and recontextualize the game board in a way that nobody knows what's happening. And then what's going to happen is essentially you go back to rolling dice. And so then the question is, well, which one of these characters is going to hit harder? And so that will recontextualize that matchup dynamic. And so because of that, it is inherently more beneficial to Fox to make a chaotic board game state. And then with Fox being more mobile, he then wants to just create as many possibilities with his movement and non-committal options as to muddle that board state and achieve that chaos. So they're both playing on risk reward instead of playing on reactive ranges. And so because he recognizes that he's supposed to respect that space, he is then capable of recontextualizing the entire game and approach to that game to achieve another way to create this. And so that is how respect works, I would say, at top level, is essentially when it forces you to recontextualize the way your character positions and acts, the way your very approach to the game and winning the game of Smash Brothers Ultimate becomes, is recontextualized because you have to respect Sonic's dash attack. And so that is my perspective on that. And then, of course, this, as Charles mentioned, as Bam mentioned, this also comes down to recognizing the consistency. Just because you can do something once, was it a fluke, or can you do it again? And even if you can do it again, are you doing it like 60% of the time where you'll hit me 2 times in a row, but on the 3rd time, okay, it's worth it? Because even at top level, and this actually used to be more true in early Ultimate, is neutral get up was just the thing to do. And the reason it was the thing is because the technical consistency in order to punish that was so challenging that you would achieve, or the best players would achieve like a 60-70% success rate. And so you would just essentially wake up and go for your highest reward option of them whiffing in your face. And then if it was so much more rewarding than what they were going to hit you with, then it was genuinely just the correct play to just neutral get up and then smash attack, or ledge roll and then smash attack. And just, if your opponent's wrong, yeah, you hit them for 10-15%. You can hit them with that 3 times in a row, but if they hit you with a smash attack that kills you at like 50-60%, go for it. Like, that's just a concession you can make on a strategic level. And so as the technical consistency of skill improves at higher levels and top level going into it, that is becoming an option that people will pick against like mid-level players. However, sometimes in game plans for top players versus specific top players, there will be an explicit note written down in their game plan. Don't neutral get up. Instead, focus on doing these things instead. And this actually is to the point where I believe we've also once again discussed this in a previous podcast episode, but ledge jump buffered is the fastest and therefore least reactable ledge option, but because it's so much faster than the others, you can include it for free. And essentially you can cover that buffered ledge jump and then still cover a different ledge option at the same time because it's so much faster. And so it's not that ledge jump is ledge jump is still arguably the best option, but it is too good, and so it enables itself to, in practice, be covered for free. And so it's buffered ledge jump then becomes the worst option because it is the most meta covered option, and so that makes delayed ledge jumps the better option because it pairs so nicely. Because if you are covering the buffered ledge jump, you have to commit more to covering a second ledge jump at the same time than you have to commit if you are, let's say, reacting to neutral get up or reacting to ledge roll, because one of these requires you to preemptively time something based on preceding information where, again, going back to the Leo example, if a player's playstyle wants them to react to specific actions and not preceding events, then you are going to start getting those situations where they're just not comfortable committing to those reads. And so at top level, you will actually have people say, I expect them to go for this delayed ledge jump. I'm going to let them have it, and I'm just going to limit the damage to my game plan at letting them ledge jump off for free. And I'm going to make sure that they can't land on top of me and reversal me. But if they get it, they get it. Like, they're going to get cornered. I'm not going to stop them. I'm not going to try and stop them because it's just too risky if they picked anything else. And so, to simplify this again, essentially you have the respect of, what am I sacrificing? So am I losing out on my best things because I'm playing to cover my opponent's best things? And if so, on the follow-up board state, am I the person who is now winning the game before my opponent wins the game? And if that answer to this last question changes when you do that, then you should not respect what they are doing because you have actually changed the dynamic of the matchup in a way that your opponent is more likely to win the game than you are. And so you will actually always have to make 2 adaptations to change in order to change this dynamic instead of just 1, whereas your opponent only has to make 1 adaptation. So again, going back to consistency, and there probably being a formula to answer this, who is more likely to win the game if they have to make adaptations or adjust a scenario? The person who has to make 2 changes or the person who makes 1? And my current stance on this subject is that the simpler your answer, or the shorter the path to your victory, the more likely it is to happen, and the more consistently it is likely to happen because of that likelihood. And so I try to keep it simple, try to keep it short, despite my long explanation, and just go to what wins you the game, do that. And if what your opponent's going to do to counter you wins their game, then just make sure that you have a winning counterplay to that. And that's really all you need. And just that alone should occupy a rock, paper, scissors dynamic as they try to counter around. And you can just go back to your base default for the third rung of that RPS. And so an issue for respects, for another example here is going back to the Incineroar example that they asked, is yes, Incineroar with Revenge does change the risk-reward dynamic, but from that point on, what you want to identify is, yes, Incineroar can do all of these myriad of things, all of these myriad of timings, but what does the player controlling Incineroar go for? Because there is not an infinite amount of revenge that you are going to have to spend as Incineroar, so how does the Incineroar player like to spend that ammunition? And if you can identify that, then that is going to be your short list for things to respect. In practice, I think what you are going to typically find is that the Incineroar player is going to go for a superlative option. They are either going to go for the fastest thing that's most likely to get value from their revenge. So this is where you'll get things like run up and dash attacks. Or more likely what's going to happen is most, I think, Incineroar players like to go for, well, what's going to just take the stock right now? And then, of course, you get to top level Incineroar, and then they try to go for a balance there. It's, if the revenge doesn't work out here, how likely am I to get reward from this? And is it still rewarding? Does it still reward for me, or reward me enough to justify having positioned myself and played the game in a way that got me a revenge for that previous interaction, instead of directly countering what they did to get the revenge or give that revenge before? Because if you could have just gone for a parry and dash grab, then what you're hitting with that revenge needs to be more rewarding than the value of that dash grab. Not just because of the difference, because as I mentioned before, if you are complicating your game plan to get the same reward, you are actually punishing yourself to a degree. Because if there is anything other than 100% likelihood of you connecting the reward of that revenge, then you are that percentage less likely, or rather you need to multiply that lesser percentage by the reward. And so 100 points versus 99 points. Fundamentally, you are 1% worse off going for a revenge that gives you the same reward as before, just because of that 1% likelihood of failure. And so you kind of have to calculate that difference. And I say that, but I promise you that top players are not going for this calculus when they're trying to make decisions. They just go by feel. But again, to reiterate and return this back to what Charles said, this is something that you'll get a feel for as you play the game more. Just try and pay attention to the matches and think about, well, was it really so bad that I got hit by this? And what could I have done to position myself, as Bam said, to avoid the worst case scenarios from happening again, while ideally still playing to get your most rewarding? And so that's my take on the subject. That's a bit wordy.
No, it's all G. All right, so that will be today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Make sure you let us know in the comments below what you guys think about the aspect of respect in Smash. It is very broad and you can kind of go in a lot of different directions, but I think we covered a good amount of it today. So also make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys want to support us more on Discord, you can go ahead and subscribe to our Discord and ask us many questions that we've been asked so far, and we'll go over them throughout various episodes. But until next time, class dismissed.